I just feel like, yeah, of course, there's going to be this iconic layer one, which most likely going to be Ethereum, but there's also going to be a diversified of layer ones that are going to stand around it and sustain and becoming an integral part of the society and the ecosystem.
On today's show, we have Wesley Xia, the business development manager of Huobi. He has a vast blockchain background, created one of the first blockchain educational institutions in China, was the director of a crypto project, went to a crypto VC fund, and today works in one of the most well-known exchanges globally. We will talk about the hottest crypto topics at the moment and get the point of view of a man that's immersed into the market. Wesley, thank you for joining us today. And why don't you kind of give us insights to how you got into the crypto market?
Of course, Joe, it's my great pleasure to be on this show today. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I wanted to kind of explore my experiences joining to the Web3 and the blockchain space in the early days. So I went to University of California, San Diego, and back in the days, we never really had anything fun to do in that university, right? Like the nickname for UCSD was UC Socially Dead, and quite honestly, it was true for me at the least. While I was studying there, a couple of my friends kind of came up, and then we just came out about this idea of doing a decentralized research platform that is based on the blockchain and utilizing the fundamental functionality of blockchain, which it is basically, recording things in progress throughout life and history. So we figure, historically speaking, the reward system, such as Nobel Prize winners, are oftentimes just one individual or at maximum, 2 to 3 people. It never really captivate the whole amount of folks that have done the diligence, the research before this post. So we think that was unfair, and we think that blockchain can resolve that issue at hand. We created then a platform that utilized virtual reality softwares to enhance scientists to be able to do a small molecule drug discovery inside virtual reality. So it was very early stage at the time, and it was very innovative. And luckily, that was really captivative of the audiences as well. And at the time, we successfully raised an IDO, and that was how I got into the blockchain space. However, it's not to say I stopped my journey of blockchain right there and there. I feel like there's a lot more stuff that we can explore in terms of blockchain. So I sort of stumped on into doing a little bit more research on currency and transactions. So I did research on DCEP, which is digital currency electronic payment, before the digital RMB have came about in place, together with Chinese Academy of Sciences. But of course, that was soon shut down as the Chinese government kind of swamped in. But yeah, it was, to say the least, quite interesting. And I think through that whole journey, I learned that blockchain can not only just be a monetary value storage platform, but it can also be much more than that. Very much so after the smart contract of Ethereum just came out, we see this new innovative iterations of different smart contracts, including DeFi, including NFT, including metaverse projects that are built on top of smart contracts. And I can really see maybe in the next decade or so, when our government's body would adopt blockchain technologies to sufficiently vote in the regulatory bodies, it will have a great impact in IP iterations such as music IP, scientific IPs, et cetera, et cetera. So I think our journey, or at the very least, my journey in blockchain have just started. So yeah, that's just kind of like an overview of my life and how I stumped on into the blockchain industry, to say the least.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You mentioned the Chinese government. I mean, what's happening over there anyway? Are they going to be a fan of crypto? Are they not? Where do you see that going?
I think with regards to that, my personal humble opinion is, again, this is like, it's purely subjective. So my personal opinion is that I think every single country in this world is still relatively discovering the technology of blockchain in the very infancy stage. Whether or not we're I don't know if this metaphor is correctly, or it's an understatement, opening up the Pandora's box of the next iteration of just increasing the productivity of the humankind in society. I feel like Chinese government, alongside with the rest of the regulatory body, is really exploring the methodologies behind a lot of the functionalities of this new technology. And I think China is just really sensitive to new technologies, very much so like you see in the early 90s when the internet came about. China was sort of like having its own regulated and also controlled environment of the internet. And then you see the rest of the world have this ginormous internet. But however, these two bodies can still be connected through a bridge of some sort. And I feel like as long as China have figured out the right sufficient way of maintaining a controllable blockchain, they will immediately starting to adopt and iterate. And that speed would be faster than any country in the world, mainly the US and also the whole Arab space. Because you can see historically how China has adopted new technologies in the past, right? Yeah.
Do you think blockchains they may be slow to adopt because of its transparency and its honesty system, that they may not implement it so fast?
Yeah. Obviously, transparency is, to say the least, a double-edged sword for many industries, right? For instance, a very simple example is when you go out there and purchase a house, right? Do you want the rest of the people, other than the real estate agent and the institution, to know about your social security, right? Obviously not. So the idea here is that a percentage of transparency allows for justifying for the transactions. However, majority of the privacy should still be preserved. That's why we see a lot of topic after 2018 kind of shifted and drifted from sharding over to ZK proof of some sort. So that enables privacy to a certain degree on blockchain. And I think that's really where we're heading to.
So there's definitely some different, we'll call them buzzwords or some words here that people might not be familiar with. And you mentioned smart contracts, you're saying blockchain, and maybe they're also hearing about Web3. What does it all mean and where is it taking us?
Okay, I personally think Web3 is a ginormous concept, but what it boils down to is basically giving data back to its people. A great example of that would be, if you look at right now in the traditional Web2 sort of thing, is we are handing over our personal data, whether or not that's browsing history, whether or not that's purchase behaviors, whether or not that's our social graphs on Facebook when we're interacting with our friends, right? Those data are very valuable essentially to individuals and also to institutions as well, because Amazon can predict utilizing your previous purchase behavior to analyze what you wanted to purchase next and give you the right recommendations. Same thing with advertisements, right? But those are essentially, if you think about it, you should own those data as an individual, right, Joe? Like I should own those data if I wanted to purchase something, or if I wanted to give consent to a specific institution, whether or not they should have the right of owning this data. So the idea is that we wanted to make data in the Web 3.0 space. Well, this is one of the aspects of Web 3, right? So we wanted to make data liquid enough that we are able to transact them either in bulk or in individual format. And we as customers ultimately are having the right of driving this vehicle forward instead of having someone else drive this vehicle for us. So that's the biggest identification between Web 2.0 and Web 3. And I think it's truly a revolution in that sense, because everyone, imagine you yourself as an individual or as an institution, you're incentivized then to kind of give out consents of your data for research purposes, right? So you're no longer in this siloed ivory tower sort of thing, and you're more in a collaborative commitment, to say the least. Like, so that's why, we have conversations surrounding DAO, right? Decentralized autonomous organizations, et cetera, to really enhance and prepare for the Web 3.0 scene. Yeah.
So do you think like what we're maybe seeing across the globe, like some of those data privacy issues that are showing up where they're forcing certain things that have to opt in, are these kind of stepping stones to where we're going, where you're going to have the full ability to kind of opt in based on certain data aspects?
Yeah, I think that would be something ultimately, maybe a couple of decades down the road, we'll be able to align with the regulatory body around the world. But given the time right now, I think the EU has announced privacy laws a couple of years ago, really trying their best to preserve. But again, my thinking behind the whole thing is that if you wanted to have like true consensus around a specific society, you will need to innovate on both your regulatory stuff and also your technical side of things. So blockchain will ultimately enable that as well. Yeah.
What are some use cases and examples of maybe how businesses will actually utilize Web3?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you two use cases, right? I think both of which are pretty good. So I was talking with one of the largest crypto donation platform that are utilizing crypto for humanitarian purposes. And I feel like that is not the best use cases, but one of the most responsible use cases to say the least. And they're collaborating with bigger exchanges such as like Gemini and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that really proves that as long as you are able to make the whole network transparent and transactable, you're able to make a lot of more good than just the existing infrastructure that's out there. And like anybody can essentially donate to the parties that they think they wanted to attribute without the interference of, say, a specific governing body, right? Or a specific regime change or anything of that sort. And moving forward, I think the second one is that recently I also came across a specific DAO, which is a decentralized autonomous operation. As I mentioned earlier, it's a body that is trying to stand up for journalists. They are called True Step, right? So they basically what they do is they essentially wanted to tip over the traditional corporate media theme of, it's a pay-to-play game. Rather, they wanted to have like the forefront journalists that are in Ukraine, that are in South Africa, that is reporting the frontline stories to be able to truly tell what they are representing. And I think that really flips the pyramid back around. So it's no longer people who are with power or authoritative resources that can put these messages out. It's the people that are even at the bottom layer of the society can get their voices heard. This is truly powerful. Yeah.
All right. So when it comes to blockchain, usually we always start with the infrastructure layer, and that's layer one blockchains. What are the main features that they typically have, and what role do they play?
I think for layer ones, there are a few types of layer ones. The ones that are permissioned and the ones that are permissionless, right? You see Ethereum was in the early days, it was proof of work, and now it's like proof of stake. They're transitioning into proof of stake. But then you see Binance Smart Chain as proof of authority, which is like you have like a specific delegated points of node to run. And I basically like to think that as a permission blockchain, as like for instance, blockchain service network in China, they're also permission. Hyperledger also permission, right? And I think we are reaching a tipping point of truly arguing, whether or not true, like you mentioned earlier, Joe, true decentralization distribution is really meaningful for retail users, right? So in essence, it's like, you look at Binance Smart Chain, do they have like less users than Ethereum? Oftentimes, really not exactly, right? The reason behind it is everybody knows that the gas prices is way too high per transaction. And and scholars often debate, you lack transparency, you lack other stuff. But the reality is, every single transaction you pay like 0.1 cent, and then on top of that, you get the maximum security because they can kind of shut it down whenever they wanted to, right? That's the whole idea behind permission blockchain. And versus permissionless blockchain, it's like everything is recorded on chain. It's kind of slow at this point, and you need like layer 2 such as Arbitrum or like Matisse to kind of help with like structuring that. I feel like ultimately the society is going to shift of be more dependent on like Ethereum 2.0 and whatnot. But right now in 2022, I think permission blockchains are really like more efficient and better for people to kind of use on. Yeah.
So how would listeners, start their research process into these layer ones, and how they get an understanding from an investment standpoint, maybe what to look for, and ultimately what may be here 5 years from now?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Joe. And I think, if you are a listener that are just stomping onto blockchain, obviously you need to learn from the granddaddy, right? First of all, you have to learn from Ethereum, Bitcoin, right? The mechanisms behind it, what is Merkle tree, how does blockchain works, etc. Once you have a basic understanding of that, you can look into other layer ones, such as like how Binance Smart Chain came about, what is Cosmos, like what is Tendermint's ecosystem, right? Like how does IDC work, and then essentially you can go into like Avalanche, Solana, right? Like how does Solana kind of comes about this idea or this notion of the chain for NFT and metaverse, right? Like, is it because they're hackathon? Is it because there are technologies behind it? Like different chains have different eras and they're growing into different niches. It's not to say like, like Binance Smart Chain is good at like DeFi, like metaverse, NFT. Not really. I feel like in the future, there will be a multi-chain ecosystem where one chain is more sufficient than the other, right? So that's kind of like my answer in terms of like research into layer ones. What was your second question again, Joe?
So if they go out there and identify these blockchains, as you just mentioned, and they're kind of trying to get an understanding from also an investment standpoint and the token involved, what are some 3 things that they could go about and making that decision, and which ones may be here in 5 years?
Oh, okay. Awesome. Yeah. So the way I think about it is like finding quantitative data that can represent and you can put a side-by-side comparison is probably the most rational and most logical. So for instance, right, like a specific chain, if you're looking for chains that are, DeFi focused, then what are their TVLs, right? Ethereum, you look at it, how much TVL does it have? If you're looking for a specific layer one that is GameFi focused, then how much daily active users those chains have for each one of their top hit games, right? Like Harmony, DeFi Kingdom, for instance, right? And if you're looking for other like metaverses, is Sandbox collaborating with them? Is Decentralized collaborating with them, right? The quantifiable metrics that could truly measure out how successful these chains are, or how enthusiastic the team is moving forward in the next 5 years, what their roadmaps are. I think those are bullet points that I maybe wanted to tackle as an individual when I'm doing my own due diligence and research. So yeah, like going into 5 years or like the next decade, which layer one is still going to be around? To be completely transparent, nobody knows. If anybody that tells you he's a blockchain expert and he or she knows about like which layer one is going to sustain like in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't think they're expert. Right? Like I don't think there's an expert in blockchain right now, and quite frankly, maybe in next 5 years, no one would really be an expert unless you're like Satoshi Nakamoto himself, right? But yeah, like I want to say the chain that has the most chances would probably be Ethereum, right? It's the granddaddy of smart contracts. So yeah, that kind of answers all 3 parts of the question.
You also mentioned like where certain chains, based on maybe partnerships, might serve certain niches, right? I mean, do you think there may just be a handful of like, we'll call them $1 trillion ecosystems and then a bunch of chains that are serving certain sectors?
Absolutely. It's like in the traditional Web 2.0 web space, you see this is exactly the same, right? Like it's like Google. Google is a big company that has the venture arm. They do search engine. They have advertisement. They also have social, right? Like they're this ginormous ecosystem that enables multi-trillion-dollar marketplaces. However, do you say that there's no other companies that's competing with Google on some of their sectors and are doing better? Absolutely not, right? Like I feel like Bloomberg is doing better than on news than the Google News team probably, right? A16Z is probably doing better than the investment team on Google Venture side, right? I just feel like, yeah, of course, there's going to be this iconic layer one, which most likely going to be Ethereum, but there's also going to be a diversified of layer ones that are going to stand around it and sustain and becoming an integral part of the society and the ecosystem.
That's awesome. Let's roll into, last year where we've seen a lot of hype is around meme coins, right?
Yeah.
We've seen some people get really rich from them. We've seen it drive awesome creative TikTok videos and, everything across the different platforms. Where do you think all this hype comes from? And what do you think are they rational investments?
First of all, I can tell you immediately, in my humble opinion, I don't think these are rational investments. The reason behind it is if you look at any, like the rationale behind any investment, would it be like, what is the utility use case? What is the physical use case of this particular assets? The price raise does not justify for the investment. I mean, in the early days, back in Hong Kong, we used to tip the waiter and waitresses with Dogecoin for blockchain adoption. Now, that's of course that's a use case, utility use case, but does it justify for it to go up 100x or 200x? Right now, that's irrational. I'm not saying Dogecoin should not have value. I'm saying the value went up significantly higher than what most people would anticipate. And you look at it is like the volatility of Dogecoin it's just ridiculous. And and to be quite frankly, I do believe there are quite a few big institutional players that are, to say the least, manipulate. Of course, that's kind of like my assumption of like why the volatility. But of course, there should be some sort of institution behind this whole momentum of things. That is not to say I'm completely denying meme coins or for that matter, altcoins. Right? I feel like this is actually a very interesting time of history as well, right? It's like you are seeing a lot more external crypto people that are jumping onto the bandwagon because of Dogecoin and because of other meme coins. And the reality is like the Dogecoin, I believe it sort of resonates with these folks as early day Bitcoin because the price, they don't look at the total circulation, they look at the price of per token, and it's at 0.001. And a lot of people are saying, oh, Dogecoin is going to go to the moon, go to $1, go to $10. But like, what's your rationale behind it? Dogecoin is an inflationary token metrics. Well, with each year, it's gonna like hundreds of millions of new tokens is gonna mint out from the contract, right? Like, there's honestly absolutely no justification for this momentum. But yeah, to say the least, I feel like the biggest utility of Dogecoin and Memecoin is to be able to draw in a lot of new users or adoption into the blockchain space. Adoption. Yeah.
Do you see how maybe some of these projects can actually turn into valuable projects in the future, or what do you think?
Absolutely. I think, I feel like the whole notion behind Elon Musk claiming that Dogecoin can be used as a legal tender for you to kind of purchase Tesla cars with that sort of coins. I think as more companies starting to adopt this meme coins, I guess, then it will have more utility value, right? Like you look at Bitcoin, that was how it got adopted in the early days. I remember going to conferences around like Swiss, Hong Kong. There would be like vendors and restaurants, hotels that would accept Bitcoin as a form of payment, and that's essentially how Bitcoin came about to serve its adoptability. Let alone Silk Road and all that kind of darknet momentum that is pushing it forward.
Do you think some of these holders that are holding these meme coins are the true hodlers in the space, and they're creating community around these meme coins?
Well, yeah, if they're holding and they can justify why they're holding, and if they can create a community voice around it, like marketing campaign around it. For instance, I'm raising money for Ukraine using Dogecoin. Then why the heck not? I think this is a great effort, and I think this is a great utilization of blockchain technology or adoption, to say the least, right? I look at Dogecoin the same way I look at Bitcoin, the same way I look at Litecoin, the same way I look at any peer-to-peer transaction utility tokens with no other functionalities other than just transactions, right?
Yeah, and so now people obviously might be looking to purchase these tokens, so they have the opportunity to maybe go to centralized exchanges, right? And that's kind of your world and where you're coming from. So over the last couple of years, we've seen also decentralized exchanges or players like Uniswap or SushiSwap come to the market. And then we also see regulatory framework discussed, especially in the US this year, right? But also across the globe. Ultimately, where do you see these exchanges going, and what role will the centralized play, and what role will decentralized maybe play in the marketplace?
I feel like there is ultimately going to be a uphill battle between the centralized exchanges, fighting against the regulatory regime all across the world. But to say the least, I feel like centralized has its own perks. We can provide, on-off ramp fiat, on ramp and off ramp, and then decentralized. It provides anonymity, and also, of course, at this moment, like I just feel like there are much more token options on decentralized exchanges, whereas centralized exchanges, we evaluate, we do the diligence to make sure that tokens that are listed on the centralized exchanges performing the best they possibly could. Now, I feel like ultimately, though, in maybe like couple of decades down the road, I hope my boss does not kill me while I'm saying this, right? Is that centralized exchanges, in my opinion, will vanish in the dust of history. The reality behind it is because you look at decentralized exchanges. So I don't know if you were around back in 2017, Joe, but East Delta, right? Like that was the very first centralized exchange with shitty ass interfaces, and not a lot of people are utilizing it. Nobody really thought, hey, decentralized exchanges would be a big, ginormous thing in 2020 or 2021, like when DeFi came about. That's because the iterations, right? Can you imagine in the next 5 years how significant improvement of decentralized exchanges will be? Will they be more functionalities added, like DYDX, so to say the least, right? They are much faster nowadays with the Starkware implementation, and they're much more sufficient in usage. So I feel like as more of the centralized market maker players, institutions are realizing, hey, maybe it's not quite necessary that we need to hop on with centralized exchanges. We can just do all this volume on decentralized exchanges. Then ultimately, to say the least, centralized exchanges will no longer be a service that is provided to retail. But that is not to say we will not be around. We can be still a fiat on-ramp, off-ramp solution to most of the retail customers, to our institution customers, to say the least, right?
Do you think regulatory framework and guidelines will actually keep centralized exchanges in business due to maybe some stuff they might try to implement on those parties on the decentralized side?
I believe so. Yeah, I think regulatory bodies are, well, in the US, I mean, again, this is a bit controversial, but I like controversial topics, right? I feel like US is a capitalistic society where, if you are a ginormous institution with a huge amount of money, you're able to lobby for whatever you kind of like deem to say correct, even though it might not be. We see this time and time again with different lobbyists, but like weapon manufacturers, right? Like the reality is, like you look at Binance, it's a massive ecosystem. CZ is like probably the richest man in the whole crypto space, and what was disclosed was he have $90 billion worth of asset, but that is not to account his Bitcoin and also his other assets. And it's easy to kind of move forward with and just pour money to pay the lobbyists to kind of make sure like all this regulatory stuff is set in place. And of course, in China, you will see the same thing, but China would be a little different. I believe there will be a state-owned centralized exchange, to say the least, that is going to enable all of the decentralized exchange functionalities, but yet still have like a backdoor monetization of like what coins is going to get listed and what coins are not.
That's very interesting. So for those that are doing due diligence on exchange tokens, whether it's decentralized or it's centralized, what are some factors they should be looking at that ultimately might help drive the utility of the token and then the price over the next 5 years too?
Well, the factors while I'm doing my fair share of due diligence is that really the number one thing I look is not exactly how robust or bootstrapped your technology is. It's really truly your team, because in an industry that is this uncertain, both in regulatory, as you mentioned earlier, Joe, but also a huge amount of uncertainty moving forward in the next 5 to 10 years, you need to believe in yourself, your convictions, and also your team. And second thing is like the team efficiency, right? Like if you are thinking about developing this and you don't turn around in like 3 to 5 months and your community is asking for it, well, like I don't think the team in that sense would be successful. Second thing, other than the team category, would honestly be the way they curate their community. And of course, So community marketing operations, the way they are able to drive consensus moving forward. And if you look at the reason why I think this is tremendously important is because you look at early day projects that are successful, even up until this specific cycle of crypto, many of the projects that are deemed successful have fostered a great consensus around their project, whether or not that's Polkadot, whether or not that's EOS, whether or not that's Filecoin, right? We see this time and time again with great projects that are having their curated market and also a community that really believe truly with what their project is trying to do, even if their project went down to like 90 to like 99%, there still is a strong representation of like a great supporter. And I think the magic here with decentralized projects with full autonomy is that you would have developers, community supporters to help your project out, even when the team is no longer really working on that. And that's the true momentum that's pushing any blockchain project forward.
And is there anything, between the multiple different centralized exchanges and their tokens that would drive certain utility and value in the future more than another exchange?
Well, there are obviously the top centralized exchange chain right now is Binance Smart Chain. I do believe that it also the Binance Smart Chain success story has a huge factor with Binance as exchange putting their name behind it. And I think the brand is extremely crucial. So if you think, I feel like the amount of resources that Binance has poured into Binance Smart Chain is just incredible, right? Like, I feel like obviously us as well, we have a strong backed layer one. It's not to say like, it is still a layer one, meaning it's fully decentralized, right? But there are supports and efforts that we as an institution from Huobi that kind of gives out for this different institutions or for this layer ones. And I feel like ultimately it's just depending on the centralized exchanges brand image, right? Like if you're saying like a bottom tier exchange that are trying to build a like layer one, and I don't think that would work extremely well given their presence in the space. But yeah, like just look at the top 10 exchanges. Whoever is coming out to publicly and saying that they are supporting a new layer one of some sort, I think that is something you can kind of really, really take a look at.
All right. So when it comes to exchanges, we're starting to see over the last few months, some of them starting to offer what has been hot and new over last year, and that's NFTs, right? Are NFTs a hype cycle right now? Where are they going? What's it going to look like?
I think right now will it be considered a hype cycle, especially with Yoga Labs' recent announcement of the April gaming of ApeCoin or ApeCoin utility use cases. NFTs have drastically been undervalued, in my opinion. The reason behind it is there are just like a lot of utility use cases of NFT that could be justified. For instance, music IPs, right? And for instance, like legal IPs and scientific IPs, all that can be represented in format of NFT. It's not to say, I own a Bored Apes. It can be my Tinder profile or my or my Facebook profile, to say the least. It's actually much, much more than that. And I feel like if you're able to curate your NFT around three specific values, the physical value of it, the digital value of it, and also the speculative value of it, the NFT project will deem to be success. And I think this is very, very interesting moving forward as well. Yeah.
You mentioned hype cycle and different aspects. Where do you think, to give us an idea, NFTs will have like the most impact? If you were to look 5 years out again, right now, what do you think?
I think honestly, like the next few years, would it just like from this year on out, NFT is going to be more acceptable by mainstream, whether or not that's like your local gym utilizing an NFT as your monthly membership, right? That can be a utility use case of a particular NFT, or big IP iterations, or for instance, like a specific movie, right? When they're coming out and Disney is like, hey, why don't we raise money utilizing this IP, and then we will pay the royalties back to all of the investors. This could be an idea, right? So when you are mentioning a hype cycle, I feel like hype cycle work in different format. Like meme coin could have like a hype cycle of 3 months, and Bitcoin could have a hype cycle of like over the next 100 years. And I feel like NFT as a category or as a niche is going to be at least around for the next like 30 to 40 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so right now, where do you see exchanges, centralized exchanges, playing a role in the NFT market and trading these different assets?
Absolutely. So obviously, we are closely monitoring different NFT marketplace behaviors, including OpenSea, Luxrare, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, Binance and Coinbase have recently come out and announced that they're going to have NFT marketplaces as well. Huobi, we have our own NFT marketplaces too. So now you can see the trend, right? Like what the pattern here is everybody is having a gateway of NFTs so they can closely monetize what are some of the NFT projects that's about to come out. Now, that is not to say we are just an NFT marketplace. We also wanted to kind of find the next big thing, the next big IP or the next big NFT that is very similar to like CryptoPunk, similar to like Bored Apes or anything for that matter.
All right. And I guess let's go to, one of our last topics here where our listeners are always listening in the most, and that is their holdings, the market update. What is happening, what they should be doing. Let's start with the cycle may appear a little bit differently than the last cycle, as we're seeing different assets come to market and they're kind of cycling at different times. DeFi's already been down for over a year. I mean, let's take 2022 and kind of what do you forecast to see in this year? And, maybe some thoughts of how people should look at this market.
Yeah, a little bit forecast of this year. I feel like a more like as we mentioned earlier, NFTs and NFT marketplaces, if they have tokens, those are the things that I would look for. More of a decentralized theme of NFT trading marketplaces like Luxrare. I would think that would be something I would pay close attention to. Other than NFTs, I believe that layer 2, especially optimistic roll-up tokens, that would resolve a specific underlying pain point of Ethereum layer 1, such as Matisse or Matic, right? So all those tokens would still have its own fair share. Number 3, what I look into is more of what I like to call blue chips in the industry, right? What are blue chips? I think Cosmos, Chainlink, obviously, every single one needs like a oracle, to say the least, and Chainlink is literally one of the best oracles out there. And also, Polkadot, those would be something I personally would be holding a bag of. But, at the end of the day, like this is not financial advice by any means. I'm not a financial advisor of any sort. I just want to give some insights of what I'm looking at right now. Yeah.
Yeah. What people don't understand is no one can predict the future, right? Because otherwise we would all be rich as hell, right?
Absolutely.
Let's leave off with like the next 3 to 5 years again. Where do you see the sectors or segments that are going to maybe outperform others and why?
Next 3 to 5 years, I feel like definitely infra project. I feel like DeFi, GameFi, they are just skimming the surface of the blockchain industry. They're fun and innovative to say the least, but they're not game changers. Game changers are you're looking at like infra level SDK, whether or not that's like a new layer 1 of some sort, like a modular blockchain that is able to increase security efficiency by 1,000x. I'm just, for example, I don't know like whether or not that project is in existence yet, but I have strong faith of seeing that kind of project showing up to life. The next is basically metaverse project. I do believe that as we are hitting the plateau of utilizing, like cell phones, human society will shift itself into the metaverse. So I recently actually made a purchase of a Oculus pair of glasses, or my friend gave it to me for my birthday, and I tried it out. I'm like, holy fuck, this is actually way better than like just Oculus glasses like 4 or 5 years ago. I would undoubtedly see a lot more interaction of people in the metaverse with the impact of COVID-19 amongst all this like more lenient corporate notion of that you can work from home. So why the heck not of more interaction in the metaverse then, right?
So that's awesome. So let's, metaverse is obviously where we see a lot of capital flow right now. So follow the money, right?
Follow the money. And look at Republic. Republic Venture recently announced their 500 million metaverse real estate fund.
Really?
Yeah. Or something like that. Yeah. But it's like a separate entity from Republic. And I feel like that's a very smart move to get in early. I think ultimately metaverse real estate would have its own idea or its own like industrial influence in the space. So I'll buy, like, if I were you, Joe, I'll probably go in and go into Sandbox or Metaverse and start buying some properties up there.
All right. Well, let's leave off with our last and final question. That is, what is the biggest thing that you have implemented in your life that has helped increase your net worth?
Well, one of the things that I have increased my networks tremendously is really curiosity and keep on learning. Like I think this industry, if you look at it, a lot of people in the industry is young and they're ambitious. They have a lot of energy to just kind of walk around the world and talk with different folks, interact with projects. And that's how I was. Well, I no longer. It's not that I don't want to. I just don't have the energy or to upkeep the momentum. But I still love to read articles. I still like to, get curious about different knowledges, especially in this space. Right. I like to ask a lot of questions. I ask why, what, when, how. Right. Those are key questions to ask. And I think people in this space, luckily, it's still early. So what you see in earlier industries is people tend to help each other out. And I think that's what I really enjoy continuously working in this industry as well.
Awesome. I appreciate coming on today. And for all the listeners that may want to get a hold of you or follow you, what's the best way for them to do that?
My Twitter handle is Wesley_Xia, XIA. My Telegram handle is BTC Master _985. So yeah, I'm pretty sure you can always look for me and just kind of talk to me. I'll be there for you.
I appreciate coming on today. Thank you.
Of course. All right, Joe. Appreciate it. And thank you very much.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching my latest interview. If you like what you saw, please click the subscribe button below to become a member of the Joe Robert community. Be sure to hit the bell to turn on all notifications so you always know when I post a new video. Tell me what you thought about the content in the comments below. I always read them and would love to answer any of your questions.